Today I'm going to go through a demonstration on how to use Bluebeam to track punch lists. And as I've given this caveat before, Bluebeam is not the only software that can track punch list items, or many other different softwares out there. Even Procore will track some of that information as well, and even some of your applications that you can just download directly to an iPad will do it also. However, I have been using this program extensively for several years now, and felt, with the fact that you are being given a temporary license for Bluebeam, if you've never used this software before, I encourage you to try this out on your own and see how you would be best able to utilize it for your own purposes. Now, more traditionally, punch lists were created, and not necessarily just punch lists, even completion lists or some types of documents during the construction process to track scopes of work and their completion, things that might be missing, things that might need to be repaired or redone. And more traditionally, that might have just been taking a notepad out to the field and walking around the building, noting where things that don't meet the spec, where they're located at, what the issue is, who's the offending party, so to speak, or who needs to complete the repair. As technology has advanced over the past few years, that process has, in a way, gone online or gone digital, in such a way that we can not only track the information or create the information, the punch list itself, but also be able to track the status of that completion list, and also be able to manipulate that data to, for instance, produce a spreadsheet with just one subcontractor's issues, rather than an entire notepad worth of notes, and then subcontractors having to go through and individually read each note to determine if the things pertain to them. Whereas doing this in a digital format allows users to compile information in a useful manner. Beyond the traditional notebook, it went into just carrying around a laptop, and then just taking notes in Excel, which did allow for that translation of being able to compile that information and sort and filter that information. But there's more efficient ways that we can do that, and more useful ways for people that are also creating and completing the list to be able to interpret that information properly. And what I mean by that is, sometimes it's difficult to interpret, exactly where an issue might be when we're just writing it down on paper. Whereas if we can add a visual element to that, it hopefully will guide the individuals that are responsible for completing the punch list items to actually find where on the drawings that particular issue happens to be located. So what that might actually look like here is I have a demonstration or example document here of a multifamily project with multiple levels in it, in this case 3 levels, and utilizing Bluebeam's hyperlinking capability, we've kind of provided a navigation sheet to be able to move in and around each individual unit or common areas such as garages or corridors. And one thing we can do once we're in this unit is provide these little symbols that actually represent scopes of work and then issues relating to that scope of work. So for instance, we have a certain symbol for designating each contractor in here, and we can see where in that unit that symbol is located. We can see whose responsibility that is for that particular symbol, and then what the actual issue is. So for this instance, in this particular unit, in this room, they're asking the painter to re-roll the entire living room. So putting that symbol in there is helping the general contractor convey issues that need to be addressed to subcontractors. And you can run through this entire list here and figure out, what's this FP symbol? Well, that's the plumber, and they might have come in here during the punch list phase and they tried turning on the water, and it turns out that the water is not on. So they want them to hook up the water line. Okay, but this again is a way for the general contractor to convey issues with the unit that need to be addressed before the owner walks the unit, or the owner was making this list and is conveying to the general contractor, these are the issues that you need to take care of before I accept this unit. So again, in its most basic form, a punch list is just a means of communication for work that does not meet the requirements of the specification or the contract or the documents. Now, Bluebeam itself is typically set up to have these punch list symbols. If we're in the under Review, under Profiles, if we're under the Punch profile here, when I go to this tool chest, you know, Bluebeam has several, and I have a lot of them toggled off, which I can show you some examples of. Sorry, when I can get it to click on here. Oh, well, you can see them here. All these different categories, general categories like electrical issues. I can toggle that on, things like that, where I can see different symbols relating to different scopes of work. And that's one thing that Bluebeam is automatically set up to do, is that they give you symbols based on the scope of work. So LR is light fixture stays on, repair. SA is sconce is not level, etc. You can go through these yourself and figure out what each one is. But you can imagine, you know, how many of those different symbols you would have to memorize in order just to get the correct scope of work associated with that. I have done something a little different in the sense of I created my own symbols list down here, that these symbols actually represent subcontractors and their scopes of work. So for instance, the electrician or an elevator contractor or the drywall contractor, whatever they are, they're given a symbol down here, and then I would create a custom comment for them that you know, might be unique to each unit, or if there's ones that repeat from unit to unit, I can actually copy and paste multiple comments from one unit to the next. So that's something that I've done a little different that you know, Bluebeam doesn't automatically do, but it's not that difficult to set that up, and I can show you how ultimately to do that. But one of the things I want you to notice too is that this is just my process for how I've broken down punch lists in the past, and there is no steadfast right or wrong reason, right or wrong way to do it. I have found through my experience that creating an 8.5 by 11 template file where I put each individual unit as its own file in there helps to be able to extrapolate that information both not only digitally but also as a hard copy. Say that I want to print out and tape to the countertop or whatever it might be inside the unit, so that the field personnel that do not have iPads or electric means or digital means to view the punch list would actually be able to still complete the list. So you could, in theory, have just gone with an overall sheet, you know, not even done an actual punch list sheet, but actually just picked, you know, say, I'll give an example here, the second floor building plan. And you could have just put symbols directly on here, but the problem with that is that this is, you know, more typically a much larger printed out sheet. So if you're going to try and do this process, you know, from a trailer, you might be able to print this on 11 by 17, but the icons would be very small, be very difficult to manage. Whereas this process here of you know, creating each unit as its own sheet kind of allows you to print off a whole list of units at any given time, or and print them off and be able to walk around and tape them to the unit, rather than having to again print off each one of those sheets and maybe hand them to the contractor, who would ultimately, you know, if you give them one copy, would likely lose it after the first day or even after the first couple of hours. But the art of the punch list is really kind of twofold. Number one is, you know, how we actually convey that information, you regardless of what process we use. But also the quality control side is just being able to know by walking around a unit, whether or not something meets the requirements of the drawings or whatnot. Typically comes with time. Each company has, or not each company has, but should have quality control standards that need to be met. And a lot of times that comes with, walking around on jobs with that company to understand how, what the level of quality that company is trying to achieve. Because believe it or not, in several different industries, some of your high-end luxury projects might have really, really stringent requirements, whereas your less quality apartments don't really have that requirement attached to them. Things you might be able to quote unquote slip by. The owner might not be as interested in taking the time to touch up certain things in a unit, because they're more interested in getting that building turned over and people in the rooms and leasing the units than they are with the fact that that you missed a little bit of paint, or you missed caulking a joint between a door frame and a wall, whatever it might be. They might be willing to let things go. So again, having that understanding of what's the quality expectation for this particular project, and trying to match that again with each unique project. And I'm not advocating that you're intentionally letting things slip by that should be done, but again, taking time to understand the situation that the project currently is in, and potentially some things that you need to do in analyzing what's most important with this project, as far as you have 1 week to turn this around. Are we going to be nitpicking this thing down to every little detail, or is there going to be some latitude for some things that we might be able to let go now, and also might let the owner know, for instance, that we can come back and fix some of these things once we get the warranty phase, as far as that goes, once we get the building turned over. But it's more important to get that building turned over at that time. It might also be that the owner needs to open at a certain date, and they've only got 30% occupancy of the building at the time, and so you're able to focus on those 30% of the units that are actually going to be leased, get them to a higher quality standard, and then work on the back end to complete the rest of the 70% of those units that need work. But what I'm going to do now is kind of go through the process of how I set up my punch list, pretty much at every company that I work with, and they all feel that this is a really good system that takes a little bit to set up initially, but also once it's set up properly, anybody typically can pick up an iPad and walk a unit and understand what contractor's responsible for what type of work. So that they know the electrician is going to be responsible for the light, anything related to the light switches or the outlets. They don't have to spend time figuring out who the electrician is. Typically they're listed right here on the side of each sheet, and each individual sheet is printed the same way. So there's no excuse for not knowing what each symbol is, especially that goes with the contractor or subcontractor. They can't argue, well, I didn't know as the painter that my symbol was CP. Well, you could have looked over here on the side and seen Chapel Painting is, that's the company they're working for. They should have known that they should be looking for any of these CP symbols on the plans. But it all starts with this punch template file, which looks very similar to the sheet you were just looking at, except for it doesn't have any of the unit information over here in any kind of drawing. But this is a sheet that's created at the very beginning of the project. It has some generic text boxes that are literally just rectangles and squares that are drawn in to represent different sections of the template. So, and this could be modified to include a lot more information in it that's even shown here. But for instance, in this particular project, it was important that we note not only the room number, but what building is associated with this punch list, because there's actually 7 different structures that have units inside of them. and on top of that a clubhouse. So having a building number on here and also being able to track based on building number was going to be essential, so that we can also sort and filter the information by building or by level or by contractor. So ultimately, when we get complete with this punch list for this particular building, I can export all of building 6 or building 7 items. But aside from just the project name, project number, the building number, and room number, one of the first things you need to decide on, as you've seen, these symbols are 2-lettered symbols. So we need to basically go through the subcontractor list and determine what each subcontractor symbol is going to be. You need to be sure that you're not duplicating symbols. So you can't have 2 CCs representing the 2 different contractors on here, because all you're going to see on the drawings is CC. So how do you know which CC you're talking about? So it is a little bit of an art form to come up with this initially. I've always used the mentality that one of those symbols might stand somewhat for the scope and another would stand somewhat for the subcontractor. So you can look at a few of these examples, and sometimes the company name itself already follows that that logic. Like Jordan Roofing, for instance, JR. Roofing is already part of their company name, but it also happens to be the scope of work that they're doing. Now, if Jordan Roofing was doing the siding, they might be JS, as they are here. So it really depends on what the company name is, but I think you get the idea here is if they were Jordan Roofing, that's ultimately going to be their name and symbol. But it might be that it's Jordan Contracting Services, and so we have them doing 2 different scopes of work on this project. So I'll do Jordan Roofing and then Jordan Siding, so that I can segregate the information based on their scope of work. So they might have 2 different crews on the job. Obviously, your roofing crew and your siding crew may not likely be doing the same exact work. Your roofing crew is probably just doing that all day long, every day. So they're specialists in the roofing for that company, and you have a separate for siding. So you want to make sure if that's the case, that you have subcontractors that are doing different work. You might go ahead and segregate that out just to help you get the right information to the right crews even. But once we have this generic template completed, it really comes down to a matter of putting within this blank area over here different either units or different spaces, at least a screenshot of that, so that we can start manipulating that information to make it more useful during our punch list. So if we look at this example, we have a unit layout here, and we have labels for each one of these areas. And why that might be useful, or why that is useful, is because if I label this area kitchen, the subcontractor would likely look at the things located in this room and probably surmise for themselves that, well, this must be the kitchen. I see a range on the drawing, a refrigerator. Where it might get a little confusing, for instance, is when we have multiple bedrooms. So we have this bedroom over here and this bedroom. Well, if I don't label them separately and I put items in each unit, it might get confusing as to which bedroom I'm talking about. So taking the time also to understand that you're trying to make this easier for other people to manipulate this later. So try and be as specific as you can. It doesn't matter that this is really closet 1 or bedroom 1. I just label them together. Wherever I have a bedroom 1, I'm going to naturally do closet 1 with that. I wouldn't want to do closet 2 and then have bedroom 2 and closet 1. It wouldn't make sense for me personally. But again, it doesn't really matter as long as I'm labeling each one of these units, because one thing which I'll get into later, I've told the program with the use of spaces that each of these spaces it has a particular label to them. So actually, if I highlight this area over here, this porch, any symbol I put in there will be labeled as this unit, unit 112, in building 7 in the porch. So you can see what happened in closet 2 and also bathroom 1, where we have these symbols in there. Any symbol I put in there, in fact, if I click on the symbol, you'll see that it's labeled Building 7, Unit 112, Bathroom 1. Building 7, Unit 112, Bathroom 1. So I've taken the time to go through and actually create spaces that also correspond with the title of each individual area, so that when I print this out, I'll print out an Excel sheet that has this information in it, but also the physical paper of the layout. I'm going to print this sheet out as well, taped at the counter, so they can see this is what I'm calling the living room, this is what I'm calling the hallway, this is what I'm calling laundry, so on and so forth. But in order to get these unit layouts, you have to go back to your drawings to find, which drawing truly represents best those individual units. And this might not be a multifamily project; it might just be an office building. So you might go back to your overall floor plans. For instance, if this is the first floor plan, I can come in here and I can highlight certain areas and take screenshots of them and then paste them into that 8.5 by 11 template file, and I can start punching those units with that information. But you'll see here that this isn't labeled, so there also might be some extra steps you need to take in order to get them properly labeled. So just understand that might be something you need to do before moving on to your next unit. I'll take an example here. So I'll get a snapshot of this particular unit, for instance, and then come back and paste that into my template here. And I might rotate it so it best fits as large as possible on the sheet. If there's anything else any attributes I want to change, so that's it. So I can flatten that actually to make it a part of that particular drawing, and I can come in here also and erase some things if I wanted to. Grab my eraser here. I can come in here and clean up this unit a little bit by erasing some of the information out of it that might not be useful to the actual punch process. Then I could come here with the typewriter tool and start labeling these individual spaces. So I can also come in here and change that to be a little larger. Auto size that text box. Now, nice thing about Bluebeam too is that if I want to maintain that same size, that same formatting, I can do a couple of things here. I can set that as default for one. So now anytime that I grab that typewriter, it's going to have that same those same characteristics or attributes about it. So I go through here and label all these, and then I would flatten them all once I completed that, which lasso all these in here so I can flatten them at once. And flattening makes them just a part of the drawing itself, so that later when I'm editing it, I'm not going to be moving that that label around the room at all. But I also get to a point where I want to just flatten everything about this unit so that the only thing that will come up in the markups later on, for instance, if we're in 112, the only things that are actually in here are symbols. Okay, so I have no rectangles or no text boxes that you see in there, and that's because I've flattened everything to be part of the drawing. Whereas here you can see that every single rectangle, even though it's the same exact template file, all these individual rectangles are still searchable. So if we were to, for instance, export this out with information about the markups list, which is what we're after, it'll export all these rectangles as part of the drawing, which is not something we want. But again, just going back to our template file, once we have this where we want it on the, and we flattened it and we've labeled it out, now it comes down to adding these spaces to it. to represent certain areas, so that when I drop a symbol on here and I want it to automatically label it with living room, I need to identify, well, where's the living room? So I'll literally just come in here and I will determine where the delineation point is for the living room. And I will just label it living room. And I would do that for each space. So out here with the porch, and be careful that you don't overlap the spaces. They need to be slightly out from each other. So patio, so on and so forth. So you get the idea. So anything that I put in that space, watch what happens when I put it in there. It'll automatically be labeled with patio. This one would automatically be labeled with living room. Now the next step to that is, once I have all these individual spaces in here, I come back to my spaces icon here. I add a space that encapsulates all of those other spaces in here, and I would call that unit. And in the template file, I just do a random number like 000 if it's a 3-digit unit or a 4-digit unit, because I would likely create this one file as a template for different unit types as well, so I don't have to keep recreating it later. I would just open up that unit type template and then modify the information and save it as a new unit number. But let's say we're doing this for unit 103. So watch what happens. These icons automatically update with unit 103. Well, I can also come in here and add another one that surrounds all of that, and I could call it building 8. So it keeps updating the information with the actual space that each one is associated with. So now this is building 8, unit 103, living room. And if I had 40 different units inside building 8 that had all these different comments in the living room, I would be able to segregate all that information by that contractor, or by just building 8, or just by even sorting and filtering all of the 100 level units, that'd be level 1, or 200 level units, that'd be level 2. And as I'm saving these as well, I'm also updating this information to match, so that when I print off the sheet, I know that this is associated with building 8 and room number 103 that I'm going to tape to that particular counter. So again, this is keeping in mind, this is an example of how I've been able to navigate the multifamily industry where we have lots of similarly laid out units. So if I didn't add this information to each sheet, when I print it out, I wouldn't necessarily know whether that's associated with room 103, 104, 105, etc., without putting that directly on each sheet. But again, you can see how I'm starting to build the layout of this, and I'm not going to keep these particular symbols with this drawing, because I just want to show you how that would actually work. So now that we have all the spaces labeled in each part of the drawing, and you can also, by the way, with some of these spaces that aren't necessarily nice and square, like this kitchen for instance, I can start clicking around the perimeter like so, clicking from corner to corner. And notice how I'm kind of staying halfway in the wall there, because I want to be sure that I'm not encroaching on the next adjacent space. And I'll hit C to close it, and that will be labeled as kitchen. So there we have it. So again, once you're done with all your spaces, you've basically set up your punch list to the starting point, where now I can take this and use it during even during an earlier part of the project, say the framing phase of the project, where I can do a completion list for the framing contractor of some walls that might not be aligned where they need to be aligned with, or they're using the wrong layout with a stud, they're missing blocking, things of that nature. You can create this as also a clean set for just the drywall, or just before we start or not drywaller, but MEP contractors just before we start the installation and drywall phase of the project to do a quick punch list walk, quote unquote, for their completion of items that need to be done prior to closing the walls up. So again, this can be used in multiple phases, all depending upon when you complete it. So the other part of this, as you've seen here where I created these symbols, is once I've done all my template files, I can come in here to the already predefined issues. You can pick any one of them because we're going to modify it. Let's say we pick this PE. I want to be certain that I've already defined what my symbols are going to be, but I'm just going to make up a random one here. For instance, 8D for 8 aces drywall. Okay, so I'll actually change the symbol there, and I'll change the subject to be drywall. I will delete the comment because I want to make sure that when I put the symbol in there, the comment's going to be blank, because each one I'm going to make a unique comment for when I place it on the drawing. Again, because I don't think it's efficient to try and learn what every single symbol means and then try and go back and assign each one of those symbols to a contractor. I think it's easier to define the contractor and then actually type out the specific scope of work unique to them. And under responsibility here, this is where I put 8 aces drywall, just like that. So once I've created that symbol, I would first off come over here and create a new under manage tool sets. There we go. I would add a new tool set and call it new project, whatever the name of the project is. Okay. Ask me to save it on my desktop. Okay. Make sure it's clicked. There it is. So here's new project that I've added down here. And now if I right click on this, I'm going to go down to add a tool chest and go to new project. So it adds all these symbols now down to this new project area down here. And I would create one of these symbols for each one of the contractors that I've listed over here. Now 8 aces is something I just made up there. It doesn't actually exist on this project, but make sure it's actually for a subcontractor that is on the project. Okay, so once I've got that done and I have created my symbols list here, again, I'm going to use this old Walnut Park one. Pretty much I'm ready to go when it comes to actually starting the punch list. The only thing I do in addition to that is make it a little easier. Let me get out of some of these here. I don't want to save that. I make it a little easier to navigate by, again, when I'll finish all my units, I'll actually create a link to hyperlink to Unit 107 and hyperlink to the corridor area in here. So I create this navigation sheet to make it easier to jump from one punch list area to the next. But it could just be done the same. For instance, if I bring up this sheet here 1 second. There we go. If I just want to save all my units in a folder like this, and I could access them all individually just by going to this folder and actually just selecting each one. But you can see I have several folders in here, common areas, exterior, and units, where if I just create this one navigation sheet like I did here on the navigation sheet, and then I can show you the links I created on the navigation sheet to show you what each one represents. So when you click on here, it's going to take you into that folder, to the unit folder, and actually open Unit 102. So that's how the links work that I've done with this navigation sheet. It's not something that's required, but I feel it's very useful to be able to provide that navigation when you have multiple areas in any given space, especially where it's difficult to define, what area is actually going to, when I click on this when I want to punch these two garages here, well, I'm trying to make 8.5 by 11 sheets, so I want to be able to segregate and notify the person that's punching it that those two units is what's going to be on that particular sheet. So again, just with experience, I found that it's best to just take the time to provide that navigation, but it's not, again, required. So I'm going to go ahead and close these other tabs, and I'm going to go into now, well, what's the next step when I've completed my punch, I've gone through, I've added those symbols. I bring up, for instance, unit 112 here. I've gone through, I've added these symbols, I've told the program, okay, well, this is a vent fan cover that needs to be secured in this bathroom, so on and so forth. Well, once I've uploaded that, I can send this to the contractors, but I also want to be able to print off or be able to export this into Excel and be able to segregate that information in Excel, because if you know anything about Excel, being able to filter and sort that information is very powerful. So if I, for instance, want to sort by all of Airtron HVAC's items in Building 7, well, that means that I need to export all of the punch lists in Building 7 as an Excel file. One thing this program allows you to do is to actually combine all the different file types into one giant file and do this as a not one click, but less clicks to get this information pulled out of it. Because what I need to do for each one of these sheets is to come down here and export a CSV, a Splice file into Excel, and then I can actually see this as, which I'll do for you real quick. It'll bring it into Excel, as you see here, as all of these subjects, responsibilities, comments, etc. Just like this. But in order to do that for more than just Unit 112, I need to have more than just Unit 112 open. So I need to combine multiple sheets into one. So if I go to File and Combine, I can go to Add, and then I can go back to my Building 7. I can add all the units, so I hit Control A to select them all. That'll open all the units. I'm going to go back, add all the exterior, which I'm not sure if they have any on there. Go back and add all the common areas. So here we go. So now it's combining all of those individual files into one master file. So I have 45 sheets in this whole master file, and you can see I can go through here. I've got currently sorted over here by the contractor, but I could also sort it by space. So all of Unit 212 based on subject, etc. I could sort it by responsibility. But moving on from this, now that I have all of Building 7's punch list items in one document, now I can come in here and export a CSV summary. Make this a little larger so you can see it. So if I highlight this row up here, I can actually put a filter on each row. So for instance, if I just want to filter by all of Airtron HVAC's work, I can do that. Or if I want to filter by just Unit 101 or 212, I can quickly go through and update those areas so that I can then pull some information out of that. For instance, again, if I just want to show all of the issues in the entire building for Building 7 for just one subcontractor, Drexel Flooring, for instance, I can segregate that, and this is showing them that they have issues in Unit 101, and I can also sort that information. So 101, 103, 107, 111, 201, 205, 206, 209, 211. So I can give that information over to the subcontractor and be able to essentially filter their items for them so that they don't have to look at this long laundry list of items. They know that in this building 7, I'm only looking at these specific items. So again, it cuts down on the confusion in time associated with a subcontractor having to interpret what their issues actually are versus handing them an Excel file, for instance, that gives them this information. But now if I'm just doing it by unit, I'll make sure all of them are selected, and again, I want to go in here and filter by only items in Unit 112. So this is the sheet that I would format and print and put on the counter for each one of those units. So I'd do this individually and print off Unit 112, Unit 111, 110, so on and so forth. So that's really the first part of the process, is to identify what the punch list items are, format it, and send out the punch list. But what happens when the time period that I've allotted the subcontractors to complete their work has elapsed? Well, now I need to go in there and back in the unit, and I need to check off whether or not they're complete with that issue. And that's again something I do actually not in a combined stage. I'll go back to this individual sheet. I'll open up each individual unit, and I'll come in here and I will, for instance, determine in a rewalk whether or not this particular item, re-roll the entire living room, whether that was completed. And so I'll come in here in the status column and I'll click whether it's accepted or it's rejected, so on and so forth. So let's say it's accepted. It'll actually keep track of who accepted it, what date they did, and the exact time that they did. So that keeping that in mind, we're actually able to track whether or not the subcontractor had completed items in a given period of time. So from the time that they were notified of this issue, such as an email, 48 hours later, if that's their contract, I can show physically that, hey, we sent you this email at 6 p.m. on Tuesday night. We rewalked it at 10:30 in the morning on Friday morning, which was after your allotted contractual time to complete the item, and you still didn't complete it. So we start getting into arguments of back charges and whatnot. That's some powerful information to have available to you. But we will go through each one of these symbols just like that and update whether or not the item is rejected or it's accepted, so that ultimately what we have at the completion of this unit, once I save it, is an update to that. So maybe I've completed 75% of the items. Well, now I can just filter that information by only rejected items, so that I can just focus my subcontractors on just those items, and I can sort and filter that when I get back into my Excel file here under the status. So again, being able to filter by status, in this case it's only accepted. Let's see if I can get an example here. All the spaces. So you can see here how I have accepted and I've rejected. So I could just filter by only rejected items, and again it would just give me these items which they hadn't completed this punch list on these other units at the time. So but nonetheless, again, this is my experience with punch list and best practices for managing this process in the multifamily world. It does also lend itself to working well even in hospital projects where each individual room can have its own sheet. But this is also something where we're certainly encouraging and sometimes contractually obligating subcontractors to manage this process through iPads in the field as well, because this is actually something that you've seen me do on the laptop version, but this punch list is created on the laptop version but managed in the iPad app. Bluebeam has an app on their iPad, and on an iPad, which allows you to manipulate this information, create punch lists, update accepted and rejected, all from an iPad cloud access portal. And then you would be able to see that here on the desktop and be able to actually manipulate that information back in a desktop station. But you could ultimately also give your subcontractors direct access into these files as a read-only access through some of the features through Bluebeam and Studio Project and Sessions, where they can in real time be following your updates to the punch list items. It doesn't notify them directly, but if you, for instance, send an email out to all your subcontractors saying, all right, I've uploaded and completed all the punch lists on building 7, you now can go in and access and complete those items in your iPads. Well, that works just the same as you taking the time to go through and export in Excel. But just recognize the fact that depending upon your subcontractor base, it might not be feasible to expect your subcontractor base and all of the employees that will be working on that punch list for that subcontractor to have iPad access to this. There currently is not a phone application that does that, although it's something that's been suggested to Bluebeam, that they somehow come up with a module to manage that through a phone app versus an actual iPad. But regardless of how it gets done, again, I hope you can see the benefits, as I've outlined here, of creating a digital management system for your punch list, because it's just so powerful to be able to track that information and also be able to sort the information just as much as it is, being able to just write it down on a piece of paper. The old way of writing it down in a notebook, you wouldn't be able to go through unless you transcribed every item again into Excel. There'd be no way for you to go back and sort and filter that. But again, even in Excel, if you were walking around with a laptop and just using Excel to track punch, it's hard to really get specific, with a location on here, describing it only in letters versus having an actual unit layout showing that symbol on the unit layout, so the subcontractor would actually be able to see physically where in that room, in that bathroom, was this item noted at. And that's the idea behind putting the symbols on the drawing, is you try and put them where the item occurs at. So for instance, the plumbing issue, we're not putting that plumbing issue over here in the cabinet, we're putting it right near the sink where the plumbing issue occurs, so on and so forth. So if you'd like more information, more specific information on how to do this through Bluebeam, I'd be happy to go over that individually with you. But the idea here wasn't to teach you everything you need to know about doing the punch list on Bluebeam, is to give you more or less an understanding of how you can manipulate information with Bluebeam to ultimately serve your project in a punch list phase, as the demonstration I've given here.